Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
What's up, everybody? This is your co-host, Ashley Lunar Goddess, Gorilla Girl filmmaker and horror-loving cinephile. I'm just your average podcast-producing badass.
I'm John Thomas. Some would say that I go a little too far with my love of all things horror, paranormal, and meta, but I say, talk nerdy to me, and I'm all yours.
The Dead of Winter Horror Network and It Came from the 508 Productions invite you to endure the most terrifying immersive experience in all of podcasting. Beneath the Red Umbrella, now available wherever you listen to podcasts. Beneath the Red Umbrella, when the snow falls, the killing season begins.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and all of our sleepy pals out there? In today's episode, we'll be jumping into the world of sleep and sorcery. So grab your pillows and blankets and help us welcome author and fellow podcaster Laurel Hostak-Jones. Welcome, Laurel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So very excited to have you on, especially because, as these guys know and our listeners know, it is a very common reoccurring theme this season for sleep and dreams to come up. So you are the perfect guest to fit into this season.
Excellent.
I would like to start with, I did order and receive a hard copy of Laurel's
Yay.
book. So for listeners that don't know, Laurel is going to be releasing right now. I think it's just the hardcover is available on the publisher's website, but it will be widely available. What was it, August?
Yeah, August of this year.
Yeah, and so this book is based on her amazing podcast and content, Sleep and Sorcery. So very excited to have the book. It's beautiful. The graphics, the color of the cover, I absolutely love it.
They did such a beautiful job. I just gasped when I saw the cover for the first time, just even as a first-time author too. Like the idea of having a cover to look at is mind-blowing, but then it was just so perfect and gorgeous. So they did a great job.
Yeah, it's very whimsical and like dreamy. Like, guys, that's
Yeah.
it's absolutely beautiful. And it's got the moon. So how can I not love it? So with your content, can you tell us a little bit about, or not even a little bit, can you tell us what Sleep and Sorcery is?
Absolutely. So Sleep and Sorcery began about 2 years ago. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary. And what it began as was a podcast, which features original sleep stories that I write. So bedtime stories for grownups or people of all ages that are intended to induce a meditative state or help you fall asleep at night. So you pop them in like a meditation, and hopefully by the end of them, you are passed out. And the reason that it came about was because about a year before I had had my son, my first child, and oh my goodness, my relationship to sleep completely changed when that happened. I've always been an insomniac, but after, having a kid and being deprived of sleep so habitually, I was pretty desperate to kind of repair my relationship with sleep and was constantly looking for content like this that I was able to find things adjacent, and I'm able to find some really beautiful sleep meditations and sleep stories out there, but they weren't all scratching exactly the itch that I was looking for. So I immediately was like, I can do this. I can start to kind of fill this gap, which was sleep stories that are connected to folklore, to fantasy, to magic, and to these sort of spiritually connected parts of my life that have always been important to me. So I've been a writer forever. And this also, after having a kid, it's very easy as a birthing parent, and I think as any kind of parent, to sort of lose yourself in parenting for a little while. And so it's very easy to kind of disconnect from your identity and from sort of your passions and just throw yourself into caring for your kid all the time. So while I'm trying to repair my relationship with sleep, I'm also sort of on this journey back to myself and to my creative practice. So that's really where it came from, and it has grown from something that I really did for myself to something that I thought was going to be like a 10 episode mini series. I've been a podcaster for years and thought I would just do this for like a little one off, and then 2 years later, we're about to cross the 2 million download mark on podcast players, and then another million on meditation apps. So people are looking for it and people are enjoying it. And then was able to partner with Crosscrow Books to put out a volume. And so that's been just a dream come true, to say the least.
Well, first of all, congratulations on
Thank
the
you.
download and the anniversary. And that's phenomenal. So, congratulations. How does the sorcery aspect come into play when we talk about sleep and sorcery?
Right. So I would call myself a witch, and also have been walking kind of the druid and bardic path for the last couple of years. I've always really been connected to magic and to other worlds, to folklore and mythology. And so it always felt like storytelling and writing was a part of the way that I connect to the natural world, whether that is this natural world you can see or the natural world that is unseen. So the process of writing the stories is deeply ritualized for me. And then there is an aspect of magic or folklore that is incorporated into every single story that then invites the listener into a kind of deeper relationship with the world or with their inner world, their dreamscape. So by listening to the stories or by reading the stories, and then by engaging with the themes, you have kind of an opportunity to practice a little bit of magic. And that magic might be conscious or it might be unconscious. It might happen in your dreams.
Yeah, I love that. I love that your chapters are broken into sections where you have the story you wrote for that bedtime story, right? But then you have an accompanying exercise. So for you, is it the like chicken or the egg? Is the exercise what inspired the story, or the story kind of woven to that exercise?
Almost always, it's the story that comes first. I kind of sit with the idea that I want to expand upon the inspiration. I weave the story, and then there are sort of practical things that you can pull out or practical lessons that you can pull out of the story and then actualize into kind of a piece of meditation or a spell or a ritual. And then there are other times where, as I'm writing the story, I realize that the story itself is a spell. Like we are the character in the story, the point of view character who is always second person. So if you're listening or you're reading, you are a character in the story, you're participating. There are a lot of times where, as that story is developing, I realize that you are doing a piece of magic as the character. And so then that becomes the ritual that accompanies it. And so you can, quote unquote, practice it as you read or listen, or you can take that and bring it into your nightly sleep ritual, your nightly sleep routine, or meditate on it throughout your day as you're trying to achieve more meaningful rest.
I do have to give you a compliment. I think one thing that is a big strength for you is your voice, right? It's so calming, and I feel like that's one thing that like right away I was like, oh no. I mean, like yes, I'm gonna fall asleep, but like it was so easy. It was you just have that really calming presence, and when you're it's perfect for what you're doing, and I love that. And I think maybe is that kind of what draws people in. Like I feel like people are more into that maybe than actually reading. Like for me personally, I enjoy the listening part.
Yeah, I was very curious to see, and I'm still curious to see how it translates to the page. I have always I've always wanted to write books, and then I have a background in theater, so I've been a performer as well. And also, thank you. That was very kind of you. But yeah, I'm very curious to see how folks interact with the stories on the page. The one thing that I've come across a lot with kind of loyal listeners and audience members is there is a desire to make it to the end of the stories and like an inability to make it to the end of the stories, which if I'm doing my job right, you're asleep by the end and you don't hear the end. But I work really, really hard on every single line. And sometimes I'll be agonizing over the last few lines of a story. Like, this has to be absolutely perfect. And then I'm like, Laurel, calm down. If you're doing your job, nobody hears this. So I think there is a comfort and a desire to having that thing by your bedside and being able to kind of pick and choose where you enter the story. And, if you drift off listening to it one night, maybe you can pick up the book the next morning and find out how it all ends.
Yes, I feel like I'm gonna go that way all the time. So
Yeah.
I,
Awesome.
I think it depends on the person too,
Yeah.
because how do you consume stories in general? I think some people really are. I love audiobooks. I love hearing somebody unfold it for me. And then there are others that are like me. I have a really hard time listening to stories because my mind will just completely go somewhere else and I sidetrack really easily. I have like listener squirrel ADD, I feel like,
Yeah.
because it's so hard to stay engaged. And the story could be phenomenal. Like I love Lord of the Rings, I love Harry Potter, but if you put it on audio, I will sidetrack. I will completely distract myself, not intentionally. And you put a book in my hands and I can't put it down. I am
Yeah.
lost in the world and my mind just unfolds with it and I attach in a different way. So I love that you're giving options. You tap into the people that want to hear and that's their, sensory perception that they prefer. And then you have the ones that are like, hey, can I have the physical book?
Yeah.
And that's part of my experience and journey. And I think that's great. One thing that I love that you do, or that you did with your book, I should say, is that you made it accessible for everybody, whether you're a practitioner or not, whether you're into the sorcery aspect, right, and the rituals, or you just need some stories that are beautiful and tapping into folklore to put you to sleep. I love that you gave a guide maybe to people in between who are like, I don't really know how to use this for rituals. And you're like, this is how.
Yeah.
You're like, here's the wheel of the year. These are the stories that you can read for each component of that wheel of the year. And I like that you put the guide out for that, I should say, because for me, I'd be like, well, how do I use that for the wheel? And you're like, it's okay. Look, I've got it broken down for you.
And it's not a one size fits all. It's really, there's no wrong way to engage with the material. And there's nothing you need to engage with the material except yourself and your imagination. And that's something that I have kind of learned through writing the stories is that when it comes to, especially in the modern kind of Instagram age, when it comes to witchcraft and adjacent sort of earth spirited traditions, it's really easy to fall into a trap where you feel like you have to buy all the crystals and all the herbs and all the books and all the things, and you have to have all the right jewelry, etc. And it can really easily get commodified. And one way that I have engaged with the sort of material of the practice is energetically working with it as story. It's more powerful for me to kind of meditate on the folklore, mythology, and like medicinal aspects of a type of herb than it might be to cultivate every single one of those herbs in my garden and tincture every single one of them. And everyone is going to have a different relationship to that. So for me, creativity, cultivating inspiration, writing has always been like the way that I work magic. And So using that as my tool and my way into understanding all these different aspects of the natural world and all these sort of magical aspects of the natural world has been the most fulfilling way to be a witch.
You've got, what, 2 years, you said, of content for Sleep and Sorcery. How did you decide what goes into your book?
That's a great question. One of the ways that I whittled it down was there are certain stories within the Sleep and Sorcery canon that are like very clearly inspired by existing IPs, and those kind of draw people in. So you've mentioned like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, and there are some very clear like you're going to wizard school and you're going to learn how to brew a potion stories, and those I love to write, and often like are some of my most like creatively exciting, but they are inspired by existing IPs. And so like they're not going into my book. I decided, to whittle down to like the most original or the ones that feel the most connected to me. I set a limit for myself of I believe it's 11 or 12 that made it into the book, which was really hard when I was working from about 50, and now I have like 78. So it's like it's hard. There were some that I knew had to be included from like moment one. Like there's a story in there called Cauldron of Caridwen, which connects heavily to kind of my past, my entryway to practicing magic, my entryway to druidry, and then also is like super connected to my love of poetry, my love of inspiration, my love of Celtic mythology, and being a mother, because there's all of this mythology associated with the goddess Caridwen that is about sort of non-traditional motherhood. So like that was a no-brainer. I'm trying to think of other reasons that I would have included certain things. Certainly some fan favorites are in there. There's a story called Fairies of the Forest Floor that is just like beloved by fans and is like, it's just joyful. It's whimsy and joy. And then there are stories like the opener, which is called The Dreamweaver's Palace, that felt like a really interesting portal to the book because it introduces the idea of sort of incubating your dreams and working with the waking world and practicing in the waking world in a way that will hopefully, if you concentrate and you are intentional, improve your rest, improve your sleep, and then help you create amazing dreamscapes to step into when you fall asleep. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. The final story is actually not in the podcast. It's a exclusive to the book. So there's a little incentive for folks who listen and want more.
Is that the Persephone story?
Yes. Yes. So, and that's one that I never felt was right for the podcast just because it's complicated. Like it's really complicated. And when you are asking people to kind of plug in their headphones and surrender and listen to your voice, the last thing you want to do is have them think about difficult topics like grief and loss of innocence and loss of girlhood. And so putting that story in the book in a way that felt like it was safe and you could exit when you need to, if you need to, felt like the right way to bring that material into Sleep and Sorcery. And then it was a really like cathartic and healing experience to write it as well, from the perspective of someone who's been a daughter and someone who's been a mother. So it's a special one. Yeah.
Now, you said something about the different ones that are popular and deciding, what to put in there, and how do you get contact through your readers or your listeners? Do they comment a lot, and what kind of feedback are you getting from the different episodes or chapters?
Yeah, there's a few different avenues. Like I said, I'm on a few meditation apps that are really the place where like Sleep and Sorcery first started to kind of gain traction. One of those is called Insight Timer, and they've just been an extraordinary partner. As a creator, I don't think I would still be doing it if it weren't for like how supportive that particular environment and community has been. And that is a platform that like really incentivizes engagement. So like from day one, I was getting like comments and reviews and like DMs from people without really putting that much into the world. And then in spaces like YouTube, don't read the comments, like mental
Right.
health, do your best. And then from social media and Patreon are kind of the places where people have been most vocal. And I have people who have reached out over email and been very like immediately very vulnerable and very kind and very open, and I feel like I have created like little internet friendships with people who listen because they just really want to interact and engage and even like collaborate in a lot of ways. So I think there are people who have been up late at night for a long time and when they find someone who is like trying to help them sleep, they're like, I want to be your friend. And that's like really beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. So it's been really special. You know, anytime you put something out on the internet, like there's going to be a huge range of reactions. And so like I've had to thicken my skin a little bit just because it casts such a wide net that like I hear from folks who are not happy. But that's pretty few and far between, thankfully. Doing my best to toughen up and put good energy out into the universe so I get that back.
Now, given what you just said about some of the, reception you received that isn't so great, is there any kind of preparation or grounding that you have to do when you're preparing these, whether you're writing, recording, or afterwards with all of the energy that comes back at you through the listeners?
That's a great question. I mean, I have long, tried to cultivate my own kind of sort of mindfulness practice and gratitude and grounding. I wouldn't say I'm the most formal about it, but more and more I find myself turning to just like, hey, I'm feeling a little like this is all a little much. I'm going to do like a 5-minute little meditation or 5 minutes of journaling just to kind of reset. Like today, I did like a 5-minute meditation to get rid of a little bit of anxiety. Going to therapy is everybody's best friend. So I believe, I don't just believe everyone needs therapy. I believe everyone deserves therapy. Like find someone who can listen to you and talk. So I'm a big fan of anything that allows you to kind of be truthful, be authentic, and work through your stuff. Yeah, that's kind of where I come from.
I love that.
That's the best way that anybody could have said anything about therapy is everybody deserves therapy, because you have the people out there that freak out when they hear the word therapy. Oh, I'm not crazy. Well, you don't have to be crazy to go to therapy. No, not at all. Like therapy has helped me so much in my past, and I recommend it to literally everybody. And like I said, that was a perfect way to say it. I could
Yeah.
not have come up with a better way myself. So yeah.
Thanks.
I think it's just another avenue of self-care and self-love.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, did you find that your own sleep world was impacted by doing this? Like, has it affected your dreams in any way?
Oh, that's such a good question. I'd say more than anything, it's affected the kind of threshold. So I am very consistently a person who just dreams about really mundane stuff. Like when I fall asleep, I dream a day at work, or I dream logistics, I dream travel, And I have worked with some of the practices that I outline in the book, and that creates a more conducive like dream state. But what it has most affected is the space right between sleeping and or right between being awake and falling asleep, because that feels like the most extraordinary creative threshold to me these days. I find that every night as I'm about to fall asleep, I'm like, ooh, I might have gotten the idea for my next story. And I think that happens right in that liminal space between one state and another. That's probably the biggest way that it has kind of affected my sleep world. Because again, I'm still a toddler parent and also like very pregnant right now too. So I'm like, yeah,
Congratulations!
thank you.
That's awesome.
So like, I'm not sleeping great right now because I've got a kid waking me up at night, one on the inside, one on the outside. So, but yeah, it's that space right between that has really become kind of my like creative cauldron to pluck
Oh,
things out of.
I
Yeah.
like that creative
Yeah.
cauldron. Now, do you feel that that creative cauldron that's occurring in this space is being driven solely by the research that you've done, or do you find that maybe you're also tapping into something else because you've opened up to that space?
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, I am always like on the lookout for inspiration and never kind of know when or where to expect what I'm looking for. And so I work on kind of building keener awareness, like kind of softening and opening myself to observation of my world and looking for ways into to storytelling, ways into kind of like creation. So I'm always like just going out and trying to pluck things. I have been dabbling a lot in, and I've been taking a couple of classes and workshops in it, but I've been dabbling a lot in channeled writing, which is more of an automatic writing process and idea generation. And usually there are these kind of 3-dimensional sort of writing prompts that are your way into that. So I've been working with particularly plants and deities to kind of access like new sort of perpendicular ways at coming at writing. So it starts with, a prompt that's more like try to have a conversation with a tree or like that's just like off the top of my head, but it's like a prompt that's not obvious, and write it in your own like special language and then come at it from a perpendicular space. So try to approach it from a way that's unexpected. I don't know if any of that makes sense when I say it out loud, but that's a space that I'm working in. And so it's been an interesting process because I've been generating a whole lot of like poetry, a lot of journals, and a lot of just like stream of consciousness, like nonsense writing that feels pretty unproductive at the moment that it comes out. But then when I go back and review those journals later, it's like, oh, okay, I think there's the seed of the idea. So when like inspiration, the bolt of lightning is not there when I'm looking for it, that kind of process is there to assist in getting the ball rolling again.
So you're going back to an idea that maybe you had earlier to help, because sometimes that's for me as a writer for like short scripts and things like that. I'll have an idea and then I'll write it down, but the rest of it's not there yet, right? It's got to like marinate in your head and
Yeah.
figure things out. And then, like for me, it's like a week later, I'll be like, oh,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And then planting those seeds is so important too. Like even if they don't go anywhere, for the time being, it's like just getting them out or putting some kind of context around them, even if they're not fully formed, is so important, so that then you have that to come back to later, and you have a seed of that has kind of germinated, even if it hasn't fully flowered yet.
For the automatic writing, I love the approach that's being used because it's taking you out of your um, taking you out of your automatic so that you can be
Yeah.
automatic. So your nature to write about the things that you would typically write about and how you would typically approach writing. It's like, no, we are plucking you out of the comfort zone so that you can really get lost in the writing and
Yeah.
maybe discover something new about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that made complete sense to me. And it's funny you said, right about having a conversation with the tree, because we've been like so many times in this podcast, I've had people tell me, you need to go out and hug a tree, just because I'm always up high in the ether of dreaming. And they're like, ground yourself more, lady.
Seriously, touch some grass. Like it really does do you good.
That's why I go hike.
Yeah.
That's my way of hugging
Yep.
a tree. I go
Yeah,
hiking.
I walk outside barefoot
Yes,
and
amazing.
just touch the grass with my feet. So nice.
It's so good. Yeah, I'm a one of my many hobbies. I'm such a millennial. I hobby hop, but like one of my hobbies that has stuck around for several years is I'm a birder, and so that is like one of the best ways to not only like give yourself a little bit of self-care and like a mindful practice of getting outside often, but it's also just like this treasure hunt that you can participate with in real life, where like every little bird that you see is like a little it's like a little treasure that you can mine and you can observe and you can kind of learn about them and see how they behave. And so yeah, having like little interactions with the natural world like that turn everyday things into like little tiny miracles, and just enchanting your world that way is so like it's just so healing, and so it's magical. That's what it is.
Do you have a favorite bird?
Oh, I have a few. So yes, I have a few favorite birds. I have one tattooed on me, and that's a merlin, which is a like a small type of falcon. And I'm also a like devotee of the Arthurian legend. I named my kid Arthur. Like I'm obsessed with King Arthur. So like I love the little falcon, and I love the sorcerer. And then I'm also a huge fan of waxwings, which are like the most beautiful bird you will ever see. Look them up: cedar waxwings and Bohemian waxwings. They're so beautiful that this is in one of the stories actually, but um, the collective noun for them is a museum. So a museum of waxwings, because they look like they truly were painted. And then I love kingfishers, who have a deep mythological connection, but they're a special bird to me. Those would be my top three.
I just looked them up. They're beautiful.
Yeah, right? They're amazing.
I love hummingbirds.
Oh, yes. Yes. And migration is right around the corner, so I'm very excited.
In Colorado, where I'm in northern Colorado, and we see a lot of bald eagles. So, and they're just chilling on rocks like nearby. It's not like they're,
Yeah.
I mean, they're up in the air, but like when you see them real close, it's like, oof,
It's
you are a
amazing.
giant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing.
I love owls too, which is funny because in my culture growing up, like it was, well, okay, it's still a thing, but owls tend to represent death and potential oncoming like curses. And so me having owl things in my house, whether it's a stuffed animal or artwork, my grandma would be like, put that away. She is not a fan of me having owls. And I told her one day, I'm going to get an owl tattooed. And she's like, you're going to curse yourself. Don't do that.
Owls have such a fascinating like mythological and folkloric history that I forgive me because I'm not like super on the up and up with this, but I believe a lot of their scientific names have the sort of Latin word strix in it, which is the same root word for like strega, like witch.
Mhm.
And so they're connected a lot with witchcraft in the ancient world. And there was like a perception of owls that they were these hags who would shapeshift into birds to fly at night and kidnap your babies. And I think the Emperor Claudius, like his nephew or his niece, was like spirited away by a strix. So, I love owls. I love their darkness. I'm loving right now engaging with like unsavory qualities, quote unquote unsavory qualities, and like turning them into like strengths and superpowers. So yeah, identifying with the kind of like dark goddess witch identity is like my fave right now.
Yeah, owls were associated with Lilith too. She's supposed to have
Yes,
like owl feet and she has the owl wings and she takes your babies at night too. So,
absolutely. That's
it's
all from the same pot. Yeah.
which is funny because you see, like, if anybody who's ever seen an actual owl in person, they're so adorable, and I just wanna, like, you don't, but you wanna pinch their little owl cheeks, like, they're so adorable.
Yeah. It's so funny. We were talking about birds and everything, and I like haven't worn this shirt in a really long time, but it's a crow, right? So it's kind of like a it's like a mashup thing for like a Game of Thrones type deal,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah, crows are also, obviously, so there's so much behind them and what they represent, and but that's so cool. I'm a big fan of birds as well, owls. The owl thing is also, I think it can be tied to also just crazy things at like 3 a.m., right? If they show, there's like some kind of thing, if they show up at your window at 3 a.m., it means something. And that did happen to me a few times
Oh,
where I used to
wow.
live in Loveland. And but it was always these two owls, so it wasn't, I don't know, I felt like they just lived there, and they would always just, because they would wake me up because they're like, ooh, ooh,
Oh,
ooh,
man.
ooh. I'm like, come on, guys. Like, I'm trying to sleep.
When I lived in Northern California, we had a white owl that lived in a tree in our backyard, and you could hear him at night just going on, and I loved it, like, when we moved back to Colorado, I was like, "Oh, I miss our owl."
Oh, yeah. You get little friendships with the wild. I'll just call out, we're talking about birds, and crows just came up, and my publisher is Crossed Crow, so
Yes, they
rocking
are.
the psychopomp corvid family birds.
How did you get connected with them?
Yeah, so when I was about a year into producing Sleep and Sorcery, I realized the wealth of material that I had, and there had been a few folks who had said like, "Hey, if you ever published a volume of these, I would buy it just as like a keepsake." And I was like, maybe this is my shot. Like maybe this is the moment to like get a book deal. And it felt very it felt it felt possible but not like probable, obviously, because how often do you just like reach out without an agent and get a book deal? And so I started researching publishers kind of in the spiritual sector because I realized that there was probably a space for this material in publishers of like witchcraft, paganism, and that style of book. And Cross Crow was one of the publishers that I reached out to, and we formed a connection really quickly. And it felt like a dream come true to have them kind of reach out to me and say like, "Hey, we read one of the stories, we love it, like we would love to talk more." And it all just felt like it fell into place very very serendipitously. And I was actually God, this is wild. Like I was sending off pitches while burning some incense that has an owl like on the packaging for it. It's from Sea Witch Botanicals. They're my favorite. It's called White Lodge, and I can't resist a Twin Peaks reference. But I remember I'm like burning this incense down to the bottom, and then I hear back from them while also burning that incense, and I'm like, this is now my like, this is the incense that like manifests my intentions. Um, but yeah, so it was a quick connection just immediately. Like the people were amazing and down to earth, and it had the feel of being like a really polished and really professional but still indie and like intimate kind of publisher. And that felt like a really good kind of relationship to build for my first time out as a debut author, to be able to work with someone who was going to be able to have a personal sort of connection with me and help me through the process.
We had another author on that is part of Crossed Crow, and that's how we were able to connect with you, and like you said, it was the serendipity behind it because we had just had dreams come up on an episode, and one of the PR individuals from the publishing house, they responded to me, and they're just like, we have an author that we think would be perfect for you. And when they told me about the content, it was like, what are the odds? We just talked about sleep and dreams and how to affect the dream world, and what can we do? Like, how can we impact our dream world and set ourselves up? And just that serendipity and that alone, I was like, yes, it's perfect. Please connect us.
Yeah, awesome.
Now, you said that you practice witchcraft. Is your practice more of like a traditional path, or are you more of like an intuitive practitioner?
I would definitely lean on the more intuitive side. I feel like I am at this point in my life really pulling and building and creating a path that is relevant and meaningful to me. And when that intersects with other traditions, that's wonderful. And if it feels like I'm making it up on the spot, that's also cool. I've been studying, I think I mentioned, in the Druid path for the last year or so. And that's a little bit more of a formalized kind of process to just like go through the training. But it's still something that I'm using as like, this is just a little bit of a guiding light, or like this is just a little walkway through the work that I'm already doing. And this is a way to inform the work that I'm already doing. Druidry very much exists in kind of a Celtic continuum, and I'm super drawn to Celtic mythology, but it's not the only thing that I am drawn to. So I've been experiencing that and working with really the most important fundamentals of, that contemporary pagan tradition, which is like love and stewardship of the natural world, and an intensive focus on cultivating creativity and inspiration. And like those two things are like, that's me. I'm all about like how poetry, how inspiration, how writing, how nature, how all of those really come together in a kind of incredible alchemy. And anything that comes into my orbit that can inform that and can influence that is a beautiful and enchanting thing. So I will take it and I'll enjoy it, and then I'll set it free.
I love that you allow your curious nature to guide you to these different resources, but versus being strictly, I have to follow A, B, C, D, E, you're letting it really adapt to your practice and how that feels for you. And that's really wonderful. Through your journey with sleep and sorcery, have you found that your practice has grown as well? Has that informed your practice?
Certainly, yes. Like I mentioned, I've been a writer forever, but I've never had as regular a writing practice as I do now, because I have a schedule that I've made for myself, and a community that is interested in the work. But then the actual act of sitting down to write has become ritual for me, and so that is something that I do every day. And I create, the space and the sort of inspirational landscape for that. And then at the same time, as I'm like developing ideas for the stories, or I'm researching, or I am getting to know a myth a little bit better if I'm adapting it, or getting to know a goddess or a god a little bit better if I'm working with some of their stories, I'll sit with that for a little while. I'll sit with that for as long as I'm working on the story, and often for many weeks after. And then I'll find them come back again later. Last night, my husband and I just got this amazing smokeless fire pit. So we're like spending a lot of time outside, lighting a fire, just sitting around talking instead of like crashing out in front of the TV at the end of the night. And like, I love TV, but sometimes it's nice to do something a little bit different and interact in a different way. And every time we sit around the fire, we sort of feel kind of called to do or say something that is a little bit sacred or a little bit sublime. And so like last night, I've been kind of working with like I said before, like the kind of dark goddess energies. I've been, interested in creating superpowers out of unsavory qualities. And I was just like, let's just talk. Let's just talk about that. And we had like a really beautiful, stimulating conversation about goddesses like Hecate and Lilith and Medusa, and like grabbed some herbs from the garden, threw a couple into the fire, read some poetry. And it's like, it's all just very organic, but I feel called to that more and more because I'm working with those themes kind of in my semi-professional work.
Have you ever considered creating books around that specifically, like themes? So having like the dark goddess energy, sleep and sorcery, and
Ooh,
so
I love
forth.
that. I love that. That'd be fun. Yeah, I'm definitely kicking around all kinds of ideas for connected series and episodes of Sleep and Sorcery, the podcast. And then when it comes to like imagining like what the next sort of phase is for the publishing world of Sleep and Sorcery, a lot of the spinning that my mind is doing is around this idea of the dream world as sort of creative threshold, and the interaction of like mythology, magic, and inspiration. Like that has been really spicy and exciting to me. And so that's a space that I would love to dig more into, and to really delve into the many mythologies that are associated with that.
I love dark goddess energy. So let me be the first to say, if you come up with Sleep and Sorcery, the dark goddess edition, I will be the first one to buy it. Like, count me in.
Yes, we're in our dark goddess era on Sleep and Sorcery.
Yes, we
I love
are.
it. Yes.
Speaking of that, have you ever had fans like maybe commission you or maybe be like, hey, can you please write about this particular thing?
Absolutely. I have had that exact thing. I don't work on commission. So, if someone brings me an idea and like it's just not sparking for me, I'm not going to force it, and I'm not going to take your money. Like if you want me to do that. And I also, I just haven't, I think, evolved to the space where I am like ready to create like bespoke things for folks. But I have had people approach with really beautiful, well-developed ideas, and some of them have been seeds, and some of them have been like have formed full frameworks of stories, and that's been really lovely. I wanted to involve kind of the community more in a story last season and put this out to my Patreon supporters, because I was writing a story that ended up being called The Hall of Lost Things, and the idea was that you kind of stumble on this sort of alternate dimension, or this weird like world between worlds, where everything that everyone ever loses, from car keys to jewelry to books to beloved, childhood toys, everything ends up in this one space. And so I asked all my patrons, like, tell me about something that you lost and what it meant to you, just in a couple of sentences. And I had people come out of, all the corners of Patreon and tell me these like beautiful stories about things that were super important to them that went missing, and why that mattered. And then I worked that into the story. And that felt like, I hope for the people who listened, I hope that was like healing and restorative. But for me, it was like, I got to know something really intimate about these people who listen to my work and who support my work. And that felt like creating this sort of magical connection across the internet, but across kind of time and space. It's like you can learn so much about a person through just one little important object and one memory of theirs. So yeah, that feedback and that like connection with people, and inspiration feeding back has been really special.
What's interesting is that on social media, you have a lot of people that do collective readings based on the community energy within that space. And you created a collective writing. And with that, you tied together all of the energy within that space. So there had to be something very powerful and magical in that moment.
Yeah. I love the way you put that. That's really nice. Yeah.
Have people ever created any artwork based on the worlds that you've created?
I would really love that. I've had people say they would, and then I don't think it's ever materialized, but like, oh my God, I would love it so much. Because I'm
We're
like,
going to
man, if I could.
manifest that.
Yes. Yeah. Please. Oh my God. If you're listening and you're a fan of Sleep and Sorcery and you want to draw like one of the things that, or yeah, anything inspired by it, I would be so moved. So,
Or even music. That was one thing that I was
yeah.
thinking about, was like when I was listening to it, I was like, this would be great if we had some kind of like the Celtic tradition, some kind of music. I was just thinking about, old Celtic music, just something in the background that
Yeah. Oh my
you could just
goodness.
have, and then it just puts you there. Because music for me is one of those things that just, it can take you anywhere, right? And
Yeah.
just to have that like accompanied with a story at some point, I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, any medium. I I I would love to do collaborations with. There's so many artists and creators that I am in the circle of on social media who I am hoping to collaborate with someday. From like the Sleep and Sorcery candle collection would be amazing, or the Sleep and Sorcery nail polish. Like, I would just love to connect with people to like really get to different like sensory experiences of the same inspiration.
I would totally buy those candles.
It'd be really neat to have like bracelets because
Yeah,
some people. So I sleep with
yeah,
bracelets. That's my ritual. I sleep with bracelets to kind of protect and guide my dreams. And so
great.
it
Yeah,
would be interesting if you had like a whole accompanying, like this stone um, helps. And someone can make it themselves. Like that's part
yeah,
of their ritual is create a bracelet based on what you feel. What stone does that match with you? That's
yeah.
so random. I'm going on a tangent.
No, but that is exactly the kind of like thing that I hope people read the book and like see the exercises and then have that kind of response to it, because there are ideas and there are suggestions in the books for how to kind of incubate dream worlds, or how to kind of induce a restful state. But then like if it can spark something in you that is more connected to your personal rituals, then that is like the best possible result.
So BJ mentioned music, and I wondered, like, when you're writing, do you write in silence or do you have music that accompanies you?
It depends what I'm writing. Whenever I'm writing something Arthurian, I always have to have music on. Like, I always have to have some like madrigals or kind of like medieval pipe music playing to kind of get myself into that space. And that's usually like that's the only kind of genre or area where I feel like I have to be listening to something. What I almost always have to have though when I write is fragrance. Like, I almost always have to have incense burning, a candle, or like I have to be wearing a certain kind of evocative perfume. Like, it's really like fragrance is such a portal for me. It's so sensory, and a lot of the stories that I write like either begin or are deeply infused with like I talk about what you smell and how that creates relaxation or a particular sensation in you. So I almost always have to introduce that sensory aspect to my writing process.
I love that that you have the smells there, because I feel like for people, the most like you get a whiff of something and then it brings you back to a memory, 20 years ago, and then you're there, right? It's not something you see. It's for me, it's when you smell it, it just, it's so powerful. And I think that that's such a great thing. And I may have to use that for my writing.
Yeah,
Because I
absolutely.
never even thought of doing that for writing. I don't know.
Now, with Sleep and Sorcery, obviously there's a sorcery component, and you have the pagan practices incorporated, should listeners and readers choose to use those. Did you find that your own community has embraced that aspect of Sleep and Sorcery?
Absolutely. It has been pretty overwhelmingly positive on the podcast front, that folks were looking for this, or felt already connected to this kind of space when they found the project. It's funny because when I came up with the title of the podcast, I still have the document where I have all the like possible podcast titles. And originally, Sleep and Sorcery was all about a play on sword and sorcery, like fantasy, because I was like, it's all going to be fantasy stories. And then it very quickly became part of my kind of pagan practice. And so it has that kind of double meaning, where sometimes we'll be doing a medieval fantasy that's like a sword and sorcery story, but almost always there will be some kind of entryway into kind of an earth-based tradition that is in the stories. So it has lived in those spaces. And then really my whole life, like I feel really grateful that I have grown up in a super tolerant and open-minded family that encouraged my exploration of different spiritual traditions. I grew up in the Unitarian Universalist Church, which is a pretty non-denominational space that is, if I'm being honest, like most of the people who come to that tradition are like people who left Christianity and wanted community and wanted to do that without like feeding into a whole bunch of dogmas. But it is a like spiritual space that is super encouraging of like finding your own path within any tradition. And so growing up in that kind of community, in that supportive community, and then my family being like ready to let me walk wherever I wanted to walk. And then my dad in particular, who was like, do you know what druids are? Like, do you want to go to the empty lot next door and build a Stonehenge? Do you want to go build fairy houses? So like, I grew up in a family that like helped me find that path actively, and took me to magic shops and bought me, you know, my first like teen witch books. So I recognize that a lot of people in my shoes do not have that and feel like they kind of have to hide that authentic part of themselves. So I feel really thankful for the community that I've grown up in.
That's so lovely.
Yeah, right?
I love that. Do you want to go build a fairy house?
Yeah, that's do you have any like traditions with your family? Anything that's whether watching something specific with each other that kind of feeds into all of that? Like, you know, like my family will watch Harry Potter together, that kind of stuff. Or, you know, me and my brother will geek out on Lord of the Rings, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that like consumption of fantasy that was like part of growing up. Like my dad read like all the Harry Potter books to us, my sister and I, as we were kids. And I'm trying to think what is the like most like Hostak iteration of that, because I have the most like inside joke based family of all time. Um, but if there's anything that I would consider like a true like ritual that really initiated me kind of into you know, a more inquisitive path, it's really about encouraging a relationship to nature. And with my family, the idea of going for a nature walk was always like that was one of our like top 3 activities as a family, even when we lived in the middle of a major city and nature was like, there are some weeds coming up through the sidewalk, there's nature. Like there's a couple of trees in this neighborhood. The like the ritualization of getting outside, recognizing that like even in the midst of a concrete jungle, you are nature and you are immersed in nature and you are embedded in nature and you're part of the same ecosystem and universe, was like that was instilled in me very, very early on and turned into like a family like tradition. And that's something that we still do whenever we get together. It's like, let's go for a nature walk. And I think that has fed very much into like my emphasis on observation, why I'm a birder, why I love animals, why I love plants, and why those things are not just animals and plants and birds for me. They are connections to medicine, magic, history, mythology, folklore.
What you just said is so incredibly important. This idea that you are nature. We are nature, and I feel like we oftentimes forget that. We create this wall almost, like, oh, we're going to go out to nature, we're going to watch nature, and we forget we also are an
Yeah.
extension of nature, and we're just getting back to our roots. And I love that message so much. I
Yeah.
needed to hear that.
It's not just that we've forgotten it, it's that like contemporary narratives and like myths that we live inside, like the myth of capitalism, the myth of industrialism, the myth of globalization has like actively severed that connection and actively worked to sever that connection. And so like anything you can do to like mindfully repair that connection, I think is an act of like rebellion, is an act of magic. It's like, it's super, super important. Like just sit there and remember, just sit there and recognize it and have that be like the catalyst for how you change the way you act in the world.
Yes, so
Yeah.
much yes.
Yes. And
Rebel.
recycle. Yeah. Rebel, recycle. Yeah.
That needs to be on a shirt. Rebel and recycle.
Yeah. I'll workshop it, but
Love it. It's completely true. We do get conditioned to forget that we are nature. And, I feel like a lot of people on the path of whatever you want to call it, enlightenment, transcendence, awakening, they're all just learning to tap back into themselves and reconnect that cord. So, or remember that cord exists. It's kind of like shriveled and still there, but like it's there. We just have
it's
to remember
there.
that
Yeah.
and rebuild it. Revive it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, is there a specific project, or I'm going to go with feeling, that you'd like to see manifest next?
Ooh. I mean, if I can just like have this baby and keep working, I'm like, man, all I can see right now is having a baby. But
You got this, mama.
yeah, I do feel like with the second kid, I feel very a lot less of the unknown and a lot more of the just like, okay, yeah, we're gonna be fine. It's gonna be a huge change, but it's gonna be beautiful. Um, I'm always dreaming of the next story, but then I'm always dreaming of like the next sweeping, overarching thing. What's the next thing for me? And it's always been writing. If if I can quit my day job, put that out into the universe, and I can
Put it
do
out there.
just this. I do one day want to expand some of the little seeds that I have planted in Sleep and Sorcery stories. I feel like are entryways to like full story universes, and so there is like one particular location that I keep returning to in some of the stories that I think would be like a beautiful space to expand into a novel. So that's something that is like I'm letting that simmer, but I think it has a lot of potential. So we'll see. I have been in the podcasting world for a few years, and the other show that I produce is called The Midnight Myth. We love alliteration in this house. And that is a podcast I produce with my husband, that is more of a conversation style podcast about popular culture, so movies, TV, books, and their connections in mythology, philosophy, and history. He's a huge history buff. And then I'm, always interacting with mythology. So we love to kind of dive into the popular culture of today or of, yesteryear and find those connections there. So that is, that's a show that's become really difficult to produce as we've become parents, because we need to both be in the same room for over an hour without our child tugging at us. But maybe there's an expansion of that, and maybe there's a way to bring those two worlds together. I think there's already been some of that where I've been working on a story for Sleep and Sorcery, and then we have like expanded on some of the same themes in a discussion format on the Midnight Myth. So maybe there's that. And then, we're also talking about maybe producing an audio drama someday too. So that would be awesome. Because, I got into podcasting, and then like Sleep and Sorcery is super influenced by like my love of old timey radio serials. And I love that audio fiction is back in the podcasting world, and that it's pulling from the same kind of thing that drew us around a radio cabinet, all those years ago. So yeah, there's a lot of potential in audio, I think.
If anybody can make that happen, all of that happen, I know it's you.
Yeah.
I feel it. Now, where can people find your projects, like Midnight Mythology, and was that what? Okay.
Midnight Myth, yeah.
Midnight Myth. Okay. Midnight Myth and Sleep and Sorcery. Where can they find different projects that you have going on?
Yes. Awesome. So first of all, check out the book at crosscrowbooks.com. You can order the hardback today. So this is the beautiful, like glossy book jacket, but then there is like this incredible foil stamped cover too. So it's like an amazing keepsake if you're someone who enjoys having hardcovers around. And that's available now. It'll ship right away. And then you can also pre-order through the publisher, and now I believe through Amazon, unfortunately, but also like Bookshop, which I'm a huge fan of if you want to support local independent bookstores, Barnes & Noble. You can pre-order the paperback, which will come out in August. And then if you want to listen to the podcast, I'm available anywhere podcasts are found, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. And then on Insight Timer, and a few stories are available on Aura if you're an Aura listener, and YouTube. So that's where to go to listen. You can find us on the web at midnightmyth.com. You can find info about all my shows. So Midnight Myth, Sleep and Sorcery, and then my husband creates a Stephen King podcast if you're a Stephen King nerd. And it's all through the lens of The Dark Tower. So it's how every Stephen King book connects to the nexus of the Dark Tower. So highly recommend The Wheel of Ka. And then you can find Sleep and Sorcery on Instagram at Sleep and Sorcery. I think that's all the places.
We will find you. It's not hard, by the way. You can just Google
it.
Sleep and Sorcery, and you will find it will pop up with every location. So top hits will take you where you need to go. Love that your husband does a Stephen King podcast, because on this podcast, we love horror films. We love the horror genre. We love horror books. So right up our alley.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happily putting you in touch with him too. So and he like dragged me into like reading Stephen King too. And now I'm like, oh no, I'm a Stephen King fan now. So
you're like, how did this happen?
I never thought it could happen to me. But yeah, so a lot of good stuff.
Do you like horror movies?
I love horror movies.
What's your favorite?
Okay. I would have to probably say my favorite right now is Hereditary. Ooh. Like I just really deeply love it, but I'm also like, I'm hardcore with The Shining. We're out in Colorado last year, and we stayed at the Stanley and did the whole tour and got in the bathtub and everything. And that was just life-changing. It was amazing.
So cool.
But yeah, and I love like old-timey horror movies too. Like the original Haunting is a favorite, and this like 1950s or 1960s movie called Dead of Night has like stuck with me forever. So that's fun if you like Hays Code, like really sort of subtle supernatural ghostly horror that doesn't show anything but is just creepy.
Laurel, I do believe you're one of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am so appreciative that you came on to talk to us about sleep and sorcery and that you are providing these kind of resources for people because, like you said, sleep is so very important. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, as we go through our trajectory of life, we disconnect from our dream world, and you're helping people find the way to reconnect or at least start that journey. So, thank you so much for coming on. Did anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap this amazing episode up?
I just know I'm gonna be listening more because yeah, it's great. Like there's so many stories that I want to get into, and obviously try not to fall asleep, but then also let myself fall
No,
asleep.
yeah, surrender.
You don't have to research anymore, so you can actually let yourself fall asleep.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a great time.
Yeah, this was fantastic. The time went by so quickly. All right, John Thomas, you want to bring us home?
Alrighty, I sure do. Thank you again, Laurel, for coming on. It's been amazing. And thanks to all of our listeners for listening to this episode of 300 Podcast with your host. I'm John Thomas.
I am Ashley Lunar Goddess.
And I'm BJ Segura.
If you have any questions, comments, or episode suggestions, please feel free to email us at 300podcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please like, follow, and subscribe to all of our social media. You don't want to miss amazing guests like Miss Laurel here.
Until next time.